The average life expectancy of a medium-sized dog, so let's say golden retriever, in the 1970s was 17. It's now 10. We've cut our dogs' lives in half.
We finally got you on, Dr. Judy Morgan. I'm happy for you to join us. There's tons of people asking me questions, and I have a lot of questions for you today. I wanted to start off by thanking you for considering us last week, and just tell us more about who you are and why you're qualified to talk about what you talk about with our dogs.
Hi, I'm Dr. Judy Morgan. I am an integrated veterinarian, and I've been a veterinarian for almost 39 years. And I practiced in New Jersey for 36 years. I retired in 2020. But I am certified in acupuncture, chiropractic care, and I'm a certified veterinary food therapist. So I formulate diets and I do a lot of consultations for nutritional problems, health issues, and we can fix a lot of those health issues just by using food. And then sometimes we add in herbs and other things. And my company now is Dr. Judy Morgan's Naturally Healthy Pets, which you can find at drjudymorgan.com or naturallyhealthypets.com. I'm an author of 5 books and I love animals.
If you couldn't tell by now. Okay. So some of the questions I have based on your experiences, can you tell us one of your biggest transformations you've done as far as helping out families with their health, and why you believe it's important for us to go and look into our food, what we're putting into our dogs, instead of automatically going to, traditional care where we're prescribing medications?
Well, the average life expectancy of a medium-sized dog, so let's say golden retriever, in the 1970s was 17. It's now 10. We've cut our dogs' lives in half, which is crazy to me. And I do a lot of rescue work and bring in a lot of dogs and I've done this for the past 20 years, have brought in a lot of dogs that have a lot of horrible medical problems, a lot of allergies, ear infections, eye infections, blind, deaf, cancer, IBD, you name it. And everyone that I have brought into my house, I have been able to turn around and just by using whole foods and solve their problems. Most of my dogs live into their late teens, and I really want to start seeing dogs living into their 20s. So that's what we used in my veterinary clinics. Every animal that came in was able to have their illnesses at least modified, if not cured. And we were able to get them off most of their traditional medications by using diet therapy. The chemicals that we are using on our dogs are atrocious, and we are causing incredible problems for them. So my goal is to get us going back toward what we were doing. Why did our dogs live so much longer? I mean, yes, before we used to have more problems. Like my mom grew up on a farm and her dog died of distemper. And so that was horrible for her back in the 40s. And so now we can prevent that. Unfortunately, we've gone the other way and now we vaccinate too much. But why did our dogs live longer back when everybody had more farm existence and we ate fresher food? It's because they were getting good nutrition and good nutrients instead of what I consider dead food that's been highly processed. So if we start moving back toward that, we start seeing a big shift in health and longevity with our dogs.
Okay. So one thing I want to take away from that is you said that there's a lot of unnecessary chemicals in food, and I'm assuming medications as well. One question I had is, every day pet owners are getting pitched heartworm and flea and tick preventative care. Do you feel like that's unnecessary, or what is your perspective on flea and tick as well as heartworm?
So I know that you're in the South, and I am now in the South. I moved from New Jersey to North Carolina a couple of years ago. I did for the last 5 years I lived in New Jersey, I did not use heartworm preventative for my dogs. I've never used it for my cats. And now that I live in North Carolina, I still do not use heartworm preventative for my dogs and cats. Do, does heartworm exist where I live? Yes. Is it a problem? Yes. Is it a problem for my particular dogs? No. Part of the reason is because a healthy dog with a good immune system is going to fight off parasite load. There's a great video on YouTube where they did a time lapse and they took a canine blood sample and put the immature canine heartworm in the blood sample. And over time, you see the white blood cells coming in and attacking that parasite and literally destroying it, digesting it, and breaking it apart. So when we have a healthy immune system, that's what happens. As far as flea and tick chemicals are causing horrendous side effects for our dogs. They're neurotoxins, which means they attack the nervous system. So we see seizures, tremors, paralysis. We see liver failure, kidney failure, internal hemorrhage from these drugs, liver failure, kidney failure. So if I had a choice of using a natural preventative, an essential oil product, or using garlic, which is safe for our dogs to eat, don't believe the internet, brewer's yeast, B vitamins, so many things we can use topically and internally that are not dangerous for our dogs. Why wouldn't I do that instead of using a dangerous chemical that may paralyze my dog or kill my dog or have my dog be on anti-seizure medication for the rest of his life? So we have alternatives. Now, there are areas in the country where heartworms are a huge issue. So the Southeast and the Central South of the US, Caribbean, huge problems. And so you have to look at the environment that you live in and your dog's exposure. So if you have a dog who's outside all the time, they're going to have a lot bigger exposure than my dog who lays on my sofa in the house all the time. So you have to look at that. And when my dogs are outside, if the mosquitoes are out, they're getting sprayed with an essential oil spray that's going to repel the mosquitoes, so they have much less chance of being bitten. But frankly, if the mosquitoes are out, I don't want to be out there either. So that's when we go in. So you really have to look at the lifestyle of your pet. But I can tell you that I have not used flea or tick chemicals for my pets, both indoor and outdoor animals, in 15 years.
Yeah, so for me, along with Static, he doesn't take those medications either. After doing my own research, I felt that he was better off fighting it on his own. But I wanted to hear what your perspective was on that. Now, the garlic is an interesting topic because for me, I feed Static garlic. We are in Atlanta, Georgia, so like you said, the Southeast is prone to more, fleas, ticks, etc. So garlic has worked very well for us. And what I feel like might be fair, tell me if this is wrong in a way, is when we enter into spring and summer, when the flea and the ticks are out more, what I thought would be fair would be to try some form of care, just not the pills, maybe like an oil of some sort. But there is a need for additional security during the more warmer months.
Well, so I have a client in Florida who was having a flea problem for years and years, and she was trying all the essential oils and garlic and things on her dogs and was not getting anywhere. And so we had her add in beneficial nematodes, which are actually little live bugs that you spray on your yard. And they eat the immature stages, the eggs, the larvae, the nymphs of the fleas and ticks. And so if your dog is in just your yard in a controlled area, you can treat that area. So there are essential oil sprays you can use on your yard. My sister lives in Massachusetts and ticks are horrible. So Lyme disease is just a huge issue for her up there. And she has her yard sprayed with cedar oil once a month during the warmer months of the year to keep her dogs from having ticks. So there's just so many things that you can layer on. And interestingly, there was a social media post on this recently, and a woman on there said, I have fed my dogs raw food their entire lives. I have given them garlic in their food, and I have had zero problems with fleas and ticks. And then she was going somewhere else for a few months, and uh, had to take a different food with her. She didn't have freezer space. She couldn't take the raw food with her. So she put them on something that she thought would be as healthy as possible, still kept up her garlic and her B vitamins and the other things that she was doing. All of her dogs got fleas and had tick problems. And she said, and she was still continuing all the other things that she'd been doing. And the next year, when she went back to that area for that 3-month period, she figured out how to do raw food and still continue with the garlic and the other products, 0 fleas and ticks. So just the change to a food that was not as good for the dogs was enough for their immune system to say, I can't.
Mm-hmm. The dog's immune system couldn't really thrive.
Right. It needed that extra little edge. So food has a lot to do with everything. It's not just a fad of, people are talking about going back to our roots and feeding raw food. No, we're talking about going back to making the immune system as healthy as possible and feeding what our dogs are meant to eat. And my dogs have been raw fed for about 20 years now. I do have one new rescue right now who does not recognize raw food as food. He doesn't like the texture. I gave him a raw chicken heart and he went,
What breed is it?
A Cocker Spaniel. So I'm taking his raw food and we're gently cooking it and we're making it, less cooked each time. So we figure it's only a matter of time. We will get him switched over to having it raw. But so gently cooked of a very high quality food is the next best step if you have a dog who's like, I don't recognize that stuff. It's slimy.
Yeah, so that's great.
If you have a dog who's eaten dry kibble for their entire life, the only thing they recognize as food is little hard, dry brown balls. And then when you give them something that's kind of slimy and squishy, you would think they would dive right in. It's like, oh, liver, yum. No, some of them are like, I don't know what that is. And pretty much most of the rescues that I bring in, we have to go through this process because they don't recognize the food.
Yeah, well, that brings me to my next point is some people come to me when I recommend raw food and they say, oh, my dog doesn't like it. So one thing that we can do, like what you just said, is slowly transition them by gently cooking the food and every time cooking it less. So I learned something there because usually I would just say, hey, listen, offer it. And then if they don't take it, put the food up. And once the dog gets hungry and realizes that that's all they have to eat, they'll eat. No dog is going to starve themselves. So a lot of dogs might be coming over from what I call being on food stamps or on welfare, like free food, free kibble. So the next question I have for you is, many dog owners are unaware of what ingredients to avoid in kibbles. Now, I've done a lot of kibble reviews. For some reason, people keep asking for more. The truth is there are no products out there that are, I believe, going to fully optimize our dogs to have a great immune system, a healthy gut, etc. So I wanted to ask, what are common ingredients in dog foods that our pet owners should avoid?
Oh man, there's so many. And actually I have a blog on my website on this. I think it lists like 20 things to avoid on the label. But in particular, something that is unnamed, an unnamed meat. So if it says meat byproducts or meat and bone meal, that can come from any animal. So Lord knows what's in there. And a lot of testing of pet foods that have those ingredients in there actually show up with dog and cat DNA. And that is euthanized cat and dogs that is going into food. Because when you have a rendered product, which basically is animals that just died in the field or were euthanized, are put in a rendering vat and cooked down into this soup. And then they dehydrate the soup. So it's multiple cooking processes and they end up with a powder. And that's what the meat meal is, or the meat and bone meal. So if you see that in the ingredients anywhere, run the other way, because the chances of it having euthanasia solution in it, almost 100%. The chances of it having DNA of animals that you don't really want your animals eating, pretty high. And then it's not listed on the label as, hey, your dog's eating dogs. It's not listed on the label. And that may not gross out some people, but it kind of grosses me out. So we want to avoid preservatives like BHA, BHT, ethoxyquin, propylene glycol, sorbitol. Those are all things that can cause cancer, that are basically banned from the human food world, but they're still allowed in the pet food world. I don't know why. And then watch for what we call ingredient splitting, which is how they get away with having. So dry kibble has to have a lot of carbs. It won't stick together as a kibble unless it has a starch source. So most dry kibbles from the big manufacturers are only going to have maximum about 27 or 28% meat in them. So it might say that it's 30% protein, but a lot of that protein might be coming from the peas or the lentils or the potatoes or the corn. You're getting plant protein instead. I don't like to see any kind of gluten in the food. I think that the gluten basically gums up the works and makes a glue inside the intestines. So a lot of the IBD and allergies that we see are secondary to these glutens in the food. Unfortunately, at the last AFCO meeting, they changed the term for gluten, and now it's going to be called corn protein and not corn gluten meal. And they did that because they're trying to, the big manufacturers, they know that people like me say, don't get any glutens in your food. They're like, okay, we'll just change the name.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're just changing names to things. And it's not the first time I heard about the rendered meat process. To elaborate on that further, what Dr. Judy Morgan is saying is that your dogs possibly are eating other dogs. And there has been reports that when a dog is euthanized, that some people have been following the carriers or the people who are taking the dog back to the vet, and it's not the same. You're basically not getting the same remains as your dog. The remains go into food processing, and if it says meat byproduct, there's a high chance that your dog is eating other euthanized dogs. It's sad to say, it's crazy that is okay. But I had a question to be specific. So meat byproduct is what we need to have a red flag on. But what if it says specific meat, like chicken byproduct?
So if it says chicken meal, beef meal, chicken byproduct meal, then technically it is just chicken or just beef if they're following the rules and definitions that are set. One of the problems is when you think chicken, you think of the chicken that you see in the grocery store. Unfortunately, a lot of times what's going into pet food, particularly the dry kibble, because it's a cooked product, it's the chicken that's kind of not so pretty. It could be the chicken that's already turned green and is getting pretty nasty looking and starting to decompose. It's basically the chicken that we would not want to eat on the human side. The other problem is when you have a chicken meal, it's supposed to be the meat and the organs that are being dehydrated. Unfortunately, it's usually the entire chicken that goes in. So that's including the feathers, and let me tell you, a chicken head is not a bad thing for a dog to eat. It's got a lot of goodness in it. Chicken feet are not a bad thing for them to eat. That's got a lot of goodness in it. But if you're doing the whole chicken, you're also doing the intestines and what's inside the intestines, which includes the chicken poop. Hey, good probiotics, but it's being cooked. And when we cook it, then the bacteria that are there release endotoxins. So the bacteria, instead of being a nice probiotic, it gets cooked and now it becomes a toxic product. And so there's nobody that's sitting there plucking the chickens and taking out the intestines when they're making chicken meal. They're just throwing the chicken in. So it's changing your mindset from thinking what you're buying in the grocery store is going in there to, nah, it's not quite the same. So a great website to see some of that is truthaboutpetfood.com. Susan Thixton, that's her website, and she has exposed the pet food industry for what it is.
Yeah, I love that blog. I'm on there constantly reading and trying my best to implement what she says in educating more owners based on her research. So thank you to Susan as well. So my next question to you is, I don't know about you, but every single time I'm online, I'm constantly seeing ads from Farmer's Dog, Ollie, Fresh Pet, Nom Nom, these huge cook food companies are now making a big push since they are seeing people like you and I advocating for people to move towards a fresh diet. Now, people are confused. I've had people DM me asking me questions about what's the difference between raw and cooked foods, and are they safe to eat foods from these companies that are like Nom Nom, Fresh Pet, etc.
So there are different levels, even within those gently cooked foods. Most of them are using human grade. And there's really specific labeling as that AFCO defines and FDA defines as far as what they can say on the label for human grade. In order for them to make human grade claims, it actually has to be made in a human grade facility as well. Um, I I call those TV dinners for dogs because basically it is delivered to you in something that you just warm up, serve it. It's really made for the small dog owner, the small pet owner, because it would be very expensive if you have, let's say you have a mastiff and you want to feed that stuff, you're going to go broke. My biggest problem with them, one of them was just bought by Mars, which is why they have so much advertising money.
Nom Nom.
Actually, I think there's a couple more too. Unfortunately, now we've got a lot of money going into advertising, and we know that these companies are looking for, where's the bottom line? And the bottom line is our shareholders want increased revenue. So we're going to use, lower quality products. My biggest problem with these is they are way high in carbohydrates. Still, not quite as bad. Well, some of them are as bad as dry kibble would be, but they're still using a lot of cheap fillers. So you'll see a lot of potatoes in there. You'll see a lot of peas in there, a lot of rice, pasta, because which is going to cost you more to put in the food, beef or pasta? So it's still, I think, not the ideal food for our dogs.
Mm-hmm.
One of the companies you listed has had a lot of problems with mold in their products. So be very, very careful when you're shopping. And there's still, again, some of these companies are using carrageenan, which can be highly inflammatory for inflammatory bowel disease. They're using a lot of rice flour to make it stick together. So again, being a label reader and saying, well, how much meat is my dog? Because I know they're omnivores. We can have that argument and go around in circles forever, but they are really carnivorous omnivores, and they are much more over toward the carnivorous side than the vegetarian side. So I don't feed my dogs starches, and I don't feed them a lot of carbs. So I am looking for a high meat product, and you're not going to get that in most of the ones that you were just talking about.
Okay. And that'll bring me to a big question about raw food, right? So then someone hears that and they're like, okay, I want to be feeding my dog raw. Now, the question they have, I think the most frequent question I get is the salmonella. Will my dog be at risk for salmonella? Right. And I tell them, well, you are at risk for salmonella when you shop for chicken in the grocery store.
Yeah.
I believe it's 6 out of 32 or 37 chickens in the grocery store have salmonella, right? And I looked that up and verify that stat. But the point I'm trying to make is that we are at risk for salmonella ourselves. Your dog has higher pH in their stomach to break down salmonella. I wanted your take on that. And I know that sometimes some dogs, since they haven't been eating raw or haven't been eating the food that their body needs, it might take some time for their gut to catch up to be able to break down some of these dangers.
So a healthy dog, you could make a switch today. You could stop feeding kibble today and start feeding raw tomorrow, and they'll do just fine. The bacterial contamination in meats and dog food are really an interesting study when you look at, so USDA regulates human food and FDA regulates pet food. FDA has a zero tolerance policy for bacteria in raw dog food. So FDA can walk into any pet store or any raw pet food or any pet food facility, take samples and test it. And they have zero tolerance for any bacteria. So some of the raw companies are treating their products with a process. Some of them are using a, sort of a microwave type process. Some are using bacteriophages, which are basically little bugs that eat bacteria. Some are using high pressure pasteurization. And then some of them are going to the cooked, gently cooked, so that they avoid that issue. But when you go to the grocery store, 60 to 65% of the chicken is contaminated with bacteria. Hamburger or any kind of ground meat has about the same risk of being contaminated. So if you are going to the grocery store and buying ground meat to feed your dog, it's going to be much more contaminated than buying a good quality pre-made raw food. Your dogs are going to do just fine. So what they have is higher stomach acid, which is actually a lower pH. So the pH of their stomach is going to be 1 to 1.5. Where we might get in trouble is if you have your dog on antacids like famotidine or omeprazole. So a lot of people with dogs that have acid reflux or have IBD, what's the first thing the veterinarian says? Oh, we'll put them on an antacid. We'll put them on omeprazole. We'll put them on Tagamet. We'll put them on famotidine. Now we've changed the stomach pH. And now maybe you're going to have a bigger problem. Probably not, but maybe, because you don't have that acid that will attack the bacteria. The other thing is that if we tested fecal samples, stool samples from any dog, any human, we all have salmonella, E. coli, Clostridium. It's there. We all have that in our bodies. And what happens is when the body gets out of balance, when the immune system is out of whack, the good guys lose and the bad guys take over. That's when we get symptoms of salmonella or E. coli or listeria or any of the other problems that we see with contamination. So again, it's there. And all of those bacteria are in our environment all around us. We're exposed to them all the time. So, and interestingly, and I talked about this in my first book, From Needles to Natural, the only cases of people getting sick from salmonella in pet food have been dry kibble, not raw pet food. There's never been a case of raw pet food exposure to salmonella that has caused people to be ill.
Wow. It's crazy that it's being used as a way to prevent pet owners from making that decision.
Yep.
So I also had a lot of clients come to me and say, hey, Taijon, I talked to my vet about going raw. And the first thing that these conventional or traditional vets say is salmonella. Like that is their go-to.
Well, and the reason for that is if you go to the CDC website, it says in big bold letters on there, do not feed your pets raw dog food because you'll get sick. And then when you go to AVMA, which is the American Veterinary Medical Association, do not feed your dogs and cats raw pet food because they will get sick and make you sick. When you go to AAHA, the American Animal Hospital Association, same thing on their website. Who are their biggest sponsors? Hills, Purina, Mars Pet Food, and Big Pharma. So, of course, none of those companies are making raw food. Now, as soon as one of those companies bites the bullet and says, hey, we see this huge trend toward raw pet food, we're going to start making raw pet food, you're going to see those things change.
Well, I am seeing them change already. Well, like you said, the purchase of Num Num and other cook food companies, that's the first step, right? Because they don't want to be too hypocritical. So, but speaking of that, I wanted to ask you, as a veterinary professional, do you think it is a conflict of interest owning veterinary offices, laboratories, and pet food companies? And what should people know about when they're purchasing from companies that have that? And I'm talking specifically about Mars, that owns vet offices, the labs that they send their blood work to, and the pet food companies.
Yeah, interestingly, Mars started as a candy company and a human food company, and their biggest asset right now is their pet line. So they are totally shifting, but they have bought the biggest veterinary labs, the biggest radiology systems, ultrasound systems. They own Blue Pearl. They own, which is the specialty centers. They own Banfield. I mean, their reach, and it's not just in the U.S., it is worldwide, where they are buying everything. And I think that's the definition of a monopoly. When you as the client walk in What are you going to be sold? Well, the veterinarian's going to sell you the food that is made by the company that owns the veterinary practice. And by the way, the food keeps your pet sick, so you have to keep coming back and getting more treatments. I hate it. I hate it. And I think it's unfortunately going the way of the mom and pop pharmacies. So when I grew up, pharmacies were owned by the pharmacist. And so you had the corner drugstore that was owned by a family, and they really cared about their clients and their patients. And we are now seeing the mom and pop individually owned veterinary clinic becoming a dinosaur. I was very lucky when I sold my 2 clinics. I was able to sell them to my associate, so it stayed private. But veterinary care is becoming very expensive, and it's very hard to find somebody who wants to plop down a couple $1,000,000 to buy a practice that's not corporate backed, because corporations are coming in, and unfortunately there's a huge veterinary shortage. And the corporations, I was in California speaking, and I got a text on my phone, and it said, "We will offer you $100,000 sign-on bonus to come work for X corporation." Well, what individual veterinarian has $100,000 lying around in their pocket to give as a bonus to hire a new grad and pay them $100,000 a year on top of that? It's impossible. So we are seeing this huge shift toward corporate medicine, and I think it's horrible, really bad.
Yeah, I'm concerned about it too. So I feed my dog Steve's Real Food only because I like that it's a nugget form and it's real easy for me to train with. For me, it's just like feeding a whole beef heart.
Yeah.
I can't wrap my head around it yet. So I want to talk about them and as well as Viva Raw Pet Foods. I know you're working with them. Talk to us about what options you think are great for pet owners and why. Why are they superior to, let's be clear, Hill's Science Diet, Purina Pro Plan, Royal Canin? And I wanted your take on what kibbles could work if you were not able to at least get your dog on a hybrid diet.
Ugh. So I don't allow kibble in my house, so that's a little tricky. And for training for my guys, I use freeze dried raw. So like freeze dried chicken hearts or freeze dried turkey hearts or tripe, whatever I can shove in my little pouch and use for training that my dogs will eat. So that's a great way to use. It's interesting. My puppy, he's 18 months old, but I finally took him to training class because I realized he was completely running amok. And so I took my own little freeze-dried pork tenderloin treats with me, and he was great. He would work for them. And the training was done through our veterinary office, which is a traditional office because I don't practice anymore. So I have to take my dogs to the veterinarian, which is a really fun game. But he was using treats made by one of the big pet food companies, and they were all full of, propylene glycol and all this stuff that I don't like. My dog would not touch them. I was never so proud of my dog. I was like, yes, good boy. So when I'm looking for raw food companies, I work very closely with All Provide out of Georgia, and they actually manufacture my Puplo formulation for me. And Viva Raw is local right here in North Carolina, about 15 minutes away from where our warehouse is. So we see them quite often, do a lot of videos with them. Steve's Real Food, they've been around for a while and are very high quality. But what I'm looking for in the raw food is the same thing that I would be looking for in anything else. I want human grade. I mean, organic is great. I'm not stuck on organic, but I want non-GMO, and I'm not using grains. So even when I'm looking at raw foods, because there's a million raw foods out there as well. Are they all good? No. There used to be one right around the corner from my veterinary office in New Jersey, and it was the worst of the worst of the worst. So it was a raw pet food, but it was not something I would ever recommend or ever consider feeding my pets. So again, look for human grade, look for, go to their websites. If they're showing you pictures of their manufacturing, I know at All Provide, you can call them up and say, hey, can I come take a tour? They'll let you in. They'll let you into the room where they make the food. They'll show you exactly how they do it. So if you have somebody who's that transparent, yay, all aboard. There have been companies, there was one out of the upper Midwest who euthanasia solution was killed some dogs. And on their website, they said, oh, yeah, all USDA certified, blah, 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 blah. They were using euthanized animals, and the euthanasia solution was high enough in their food that it killed dogs. Huge lawsuits. So we want to be careful even when we're looking at the raw foods. If I had to choose a kibble, I like carnivore because they're organic, but it's very expensive. Like you can do raw food cheaper than you could do carnivore. I just like I know the owners of that company. I like what they're doing, but again, it's not going to cut your costs down. But it is if you're stuck on it, it has to be a kibble.
Oh no. Let's see if she'll reconnect, huh? We'll give Dr. Judy Morgan a moment to reconnect. She's back. Quick halftime.
That was interesting. Okay. All right. So yeah, I don't know what the heck happened there. So other kibbles, well, if I was going to feed a kibble, I would look for one that doesn't have synthetic add-ins. So I'm trying to think. Doesn't have synthetic vitamin mineral mix added into theirs, and they're reasonably priced. Farmina NND, maybe I would consider. Robble.
Robble, Farmina, Carnivore.
Yeah. But so even if I did go with a kibble and I didn't want to do raw, I would recommend either adding some fresh meats into the bowl, eggs. I mean, they're expensive right now, but easy to get. Add some superfood toppers. We have a list of those on our website. There's a blog on it. There's a free download on superfoods, but add something into the bowl that is fresh food, whatever you can. There was a study out of Purdue quite a while ago, probably a decade ago anyway, where they took a litter of dogs and they split them at birth and they all got the same dry kibble, except half of them had 25% of the kibble taken out of the bowl and it was replaced by fresh foods. And those dogs had a 25 to 30% greater life expectancy and less health issues just by having that much fresh food in the bowl. So you can make a huge difference with just minor shifts.
Okay. I get the open farm question a lot. So I specifically want to ask about open farm. Is it something you would recommend? I personally have looked at the bag and it has a lot of carbohydrates,
it's going to have a lot of carbs. I mean, Open Farm's a good company, but you're going to get carbs. Anytime you have kibble, you're going to get carbs. Now, there are some air-dried foods, like Ziwi Peak is an air-dried food. They have less carbs because they're not going through the extrusion process. So if you have something like the carnivore, I believe, is baked. So when you have something that's baked or air-dried, that doesn't go through that high heat processing of the extrusion process. So I would put a baked or air-dried above an extruded product.
Okay. And that's why you will roll with carnivore. Okay, awesome. So I have some people asking questions in the question box. I don't know if you've heard about Bones and Co. raw food. I haven't personally. Yeah. They're asking if you have any feedback. Nicole is asking that.
I have not fed it, but I believe it is a good product.
Okay. And I have Larry asking, what are some simple ways that you could introduce or incorporate Chinese medicine practices with dogs? So maybe we have some dogs that have IBS or some dogs that are having problems in the gastro problems. Like, what are some ways that you find useful?
So I could do about a 15-hour seminar on this. And actually I have. So the best resource for that is my book, Yin and Yang Nutrition for Dogs, Maximizing Health with Whole Foods, Not Drugs, because it has about 60 recipes in it. But the short and sweet is everything we eat affects our body. So, and it affects our body energetically. So it can warm us. So think about eat a hot pepper. Like, oh my God, your eyes start to water. You can feel the burn. So that's adding heat. Eat watermelon or ice cream. It's like, oh, it cools me down on a hot summer day. So everything that we eat has that effect on our body, either warming or cooling. Some things are neutral for our body. We can also use foods to increase blood flow, to eliminate phlegm and snot and mucus. So we actually can use foods to help break down tumors or lumps and bumps. So that's traditional Chinese food therapy, is using food to accomplish a specific objective. So a quick story, when I first started doing food therapy, so long time ago, my office manager had a beagle puppy. She's really into beagles. And she was feeding the puppy lamb and rice puppy kibble. And the puppy was literally, I mean, beagles can be a little tricky anyway, but couldn't house train it, couldn't get it to do anything. Like the dog was off the wall crazy, just like psycho ADD child. And so I was just learning about food therapy, and I said, hey, why don't we not feed lamb and rice? Because that's like throwing paper on the fire. Lamb is hot, rice is hot, kibble is hot. I'm like, we're just stoking his little fire. So at that point, we weren't into feeding raw, so I couldn't give her that instruction. But I said, why don't you just switch them to something else? Why don't we look for like a beef-based kibble or a turkey or something that's going to be more in the cooling? Rabbit would have been ideal. Pork would have been fine. So I think she just switched from lamb and rice to a beef. And within 3 weeks, that dog was completely house trained, knew all its little, puppy commands, totally different dog. She was like, I never would have believed it if I didn't see it happen in my own household. So we didn't make a huge shift. Like if I looked at that now, I'd be like, okay, well, lamb and rice kibble's got to go out the door to start with. And then I would have put that dog on a totally different, it would have gone raw. It would have been a nice, cooling, energetic diet. And, the switch would have been like that. So I did a live on Friday about TCVM and behavior and the 5 different Chinese medicine elements, and how when they're out of balance, whether they're excess or deficient. Like, for instance, dogs who are a water element, that's ruled by the kidneys and the bladder. But those dogs, when they're out of balance, are very fearful. And so if a person that would be a water element, I had a technician who was one, she cried at the drop of a hat. So they're very weepy. And she was afraid to try anything new. The water elements, like when you're training dogs that are a water element, you kind of have to talk them into it, because they're like, I don't know. That might be too scary for me. And when they're out of balance, their fear becomes so bad that they'll back themselves into a corner, barking at you, trying to get you to go away. And then if you're not smart enough to say, ooh, he's really afraid, then he's going to bite you when you stick your hands in there. So, and then another one that I love are the wood elements, because I'm a wood element. Wood elements are all good until you try to corner them and restrain them. So think German Shepherd, Rottweiler. Worst thing you can do to a German Shepherd is get him in a bear hug and try to force him to do something, because they're going to say, I'm in charge. Yeah, you're done. You're done. So, and when they're out of balance, and so they're ruled by their liver and gallbladder, when they're out of balance and we have an excess of, we call it liver chi stagnation, but basically we've got all this stuck energy. They're just like the volcano waiting to explode. And it's like, okay, I'm holding it together. Oh man, you just pushed my buttons, boom. And then they let you have it. So when you know that stuff, that's why I think this is so cool. When you know that, and I hate behavior, I hate training. I'm sorry, but it's not my thing. Like, that's why we have people like you, because I don't do that. Like, me going to puppy class with my puppy was all about training me, not the puppy.
Yeah.
The puppy will do whatever I ask him to. It's just, I don't know how to ask. But when you know their personality, and I found out a lot about my puppy's personality while we were at class. It's like, oh, he's afraid to do that. Wow. I never realized that he was actually afraid. So, because I think of him as this outgoing, crazy nutcase who's ADD child. No, he's actually afraid. So it was really interesting to kind of understand and then look at that and say, okay, well, what food could I use to support or drain that? So those German Shepherds, things like dandelion greens, dandelion root, asparagus, radishes. And I know those sound like really weird things to put in their diet, but they will make a huge difference. And that's not something that you normally would think about, but just get some radishes. Your dog may eat them. My one of my Dobermans went out in my garden one day, pulled up every single radish and ate them all. Like,
Really?
yeah. I'm like, okay, you knew what you needed. I had another Doberman. I was trying to plant herbs. I kept putting the yarrow in the ground and he kept eating it. And I'd put it in and he'd eat it. And I was like, well, we're not having yarrow in the garden this year. He was self-healing. So if we give them the chance, they will do that.
They'll choose the right thing for them.
Yeah. I when I was first learning all this, I said, and I had my 2 Dobermans and my Rottweiler, and I said, all right, I'm going to do an experiment. And I had just gotten back from the grocery store. So I had a watermelon in there and I had, some chicken livers and I had fresh beef. I had like all these different things. And so I locked the dogs out of the room and then I put watermelon and kale and beef and liver, like chicken, like all these different things around the room. And then I let the dogs in and I said, I guarantee you they're all going to go for the beef. Like, what would a dog go for?
Yeah.
And they were raw fed. The Rottweiler went for the watermelon.
Really?
Yeah.
That reminds me of these dogs online when people take their dogs and say, my dog is vegetarian, and then they put down meat and veggies, and the dog just goes straight to the meat, but the
Dog's
Roddy
like,
goes to the watermelon.
God, I need this. Yeah, but my Roddy went for the watermelon. He was hot. He needed something to cool off. And he was just like, I'm going for the watermelon. So you'd be surprised. Like I've made salads for my dogs and put them down and they're like, oh, great, a salad.
It all
You never
depends
know.
on what they need, huh?
They know what they need.
That reminds me of this one dog. Well, both dogs that I've had 2 dogs very anxious. One was a German Shepherd mix, and another was Shiba Inu. Her name was June. And they tried so many different foods with June, despite my recommendation of raw. And for why it's important trainers really care about nutrition is because if you don't have a healthy dog, it's really hard to train them. You can train them as much as you want, but this Shiba Inu really gave me a run in like patience, and she didn't have energy, she didn't have stamina, she didn't have mental clarity. And without those 3 things, it's like trying to train me and I'm not in the right state of mind. Right. So good training acknowledges the state of mind and also the behavior.
Yep.
My question to you is, for Shiba Inus, what is their element and how can we help them? A lot of them are very anxious animals. A lot of them are very quick. They can be very calm and very cuddly, but out of nowhere, those dogs turn into cats and they will just bite.
Yeah. So interestingly, it's not an across the board. So like Shepherds and Rotties tend to be wood, but they're not all. So on our website, there is a download, the pet personality profile. So you can go in and tick the boxes of each thing that describes your pet. And you're not going to be all in one category. There's yin and yang, there's balance. You can't have, you can't be all one-sided because we want balance. So when you go through, you're going to say, oh, look, we got 6 boxes under fire. We got 2 under wood, 1 under metal, none under earth. And that's kind of how you figure it out. And so it also, on that profile, it has boxes for problems that they have. Do they have skin problems? Do they have torn ligaments? Do they have vision problems? Because that shows you where they're out of balance in an element. Mm-hmm. So I would do that with that dog. I mean, Shiba's not going to be Earth. Earth is the yellow lab that's like, I love everybody. There's not going to be that. Could potentially have some water with that fear-based. Could be a fire. The fires are very vocal. They like to talk a lot. They're outgoing. They're the center of attention, the center of the party.
Static.
Yeah,
my dog.
So, yeah. So, but when they get out of balance, they're fearful, particularly of noises, like loud noises, thunderstorms, fireworks, that kind of thing will throw them over the edge. Like they just can't deal with that when they're out of balance. I think a lot of Shibas are not metal. Metal are, metal make very good agility dogs, obedience dogs, because they like everything in order. They want all their ducks in a row, and they have to have a job. Metals have to have a job. Most woods need to have a job too, but a lot of the herding dogs fall under metal because it's like, nope, tell me what my job is. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it the best of anybody in the world.
Mhm.
So and then when they get out of balance, they can't focus and they're like, I'm supposed to be doing a job and I don't know what the job is. Or, if you live in a high rise in New York City and your dog gets to see the dog walker for 10 minutes a day, don't get a border collie, a cattle dog, a herding dog. They will be out of their mind. They
Yeah.
will want to jump out of the 15th floor window.
Yeah. I'm dealing with people who do that on a daily basis. So I have to consider the dog, consider the relationship, and try to make sure that we're meeting in the middle and that
Yep.
we're not trying to be dictators.
Exactly.
Nicole says, thank you. I tied at a 5 for fire and 5 for wood. I have a Siberian Husky.
Which is interesting. A lot of Huskies are kind of metal too, but I've seen a lot of wood Huskies.
Yeah, I'm seeing more of the wood Huskies, the ones that want to run away.
The most interesting person, we also have a human personality profile. The most interesting person I've had is my husband, who's equal across all 5 categories. I'm like, honey, you have to be something. He's like, me?
That's what he is, huh?
He's every time about once a year I make him do it, and I'm like, you still haven't changed. I'm a wood with a lot of fire in there as well. So
do you change often?
No, but the elements also cycle through the age. So wood is birth.
Okay.
So then we're toddlers, we're a lot of growth, like think of trees growing, wood. And then fire is your teenage years, when you think you're invincible, you go to all the parties, you're crazy nuts doing things you shouldn't be doing. So that's our dogs when they're like 2 and 3 and they're like, woohoo. And then earth comes next, which is our nurturing. So for us as people, that's usually like in our 30s and 40s, we're raising our families, we're being good mom, good dad, and really nurturing everything. And then we go into the metal phase, which is getting all your ducks in a row. So now you're planning for retirement. You're, making sure that you've got everything paid off, and like everything is getting lined up for moving into the water phase, which is the end of life. And so for people, this is going to be like in our 70s, 80s, 90s. We get very weepy, worried about and worry a lot. We're fearful about the end of life. Our body's falling apart, all those kinds of things. So while I'm a wood personality, that's what I was born as. So we all have our inborn personality. Then as you move through the stages, like I can be very nurturing, but it's not like I'm not an earth. It's not my way to be. But when my kids were little, I was a lot more nurturing. And which I'll just say they survived. Okay. They're still alive.
And independent at that.
Yeah, they can tell you some stories about their childhood that show you that I wasn't so nurturing at times, but anyway. But I had to be in that time of my life, so.
Makes sense. So we have a few minutes left. I would want to ask this one final question for you. Is a lot of pet owners are now hearing about the gut and how important the gut is. Can you summarize that, make it if you were explaining that to a 5th grader, what would you say about good health and how we can promote it for our dogs?
Okay. So gut health, I didn't learn anything about this in school, and I think they're still not teaching it like they should in schools. And in the human field, they don't even talk about it. My mother was in the hospital with a bowel obstruction. She had surgery. She was in the hospital for a month. And I mentioned the microbiome, and the doctor looked at me cross-eyed like, what? It's like they're not even talking about it. So your microbiome or your gut health, we have trillions and trillions of little bugs that live in our intestines, on our skin, in our lungs. Like bugs live on our body. Those bugs are bacteria, viruses, and fungi, which are like mold spores, fungal spores, that kind of thing. They live there for a reason, and they produce in our gut about 75 to 80% of our immune system. So if we don't have a healthy gut, these dogs with IBD, dogs that vomit a lot, have diarrhea a lot, their immune system's not healthy. It can't be, because everything is out of balance in there. So I talked earlier about having good guys and bad guys. We all have a lot of organisms that could kill us. So for instance, when you take antibiotics, you can get an overgrowth of Clostridium. So C. diff. I had a family member who died of C. diff for taking antibiotics for a tooth infection. So you don't want to take them without really thinking about, do I need to do this? So anytime we're given a medication, an antibiotic, or a poor quality diet, we throw all those little bugs that live in there out of whack. And so we want the good guys to remain in control. And we never talked about this until the past few years. And now all of a sudden we talk a lot about probiotics and prebiotics. So probiotics are basically the good guys. We want to make sure that the body has enough good guys to work with. So we do that with a really high quality diet. And we do that by supplementing with high quality probiotics. The prebiotics are actually the food that feeds the probiotics. So prebiotics basically are fiber sources. So if you are a prey model raw feeder and you're one of those people who says, no vegetable will go past my dog's lips, that's fine, but you better be feeding the hair and the fiber sources. So whether that's rumen contents from the cow, pig, or cow, sheep, deer, or feeding the hair. So we need that fiber source to feed the good bacteria. For my dogs, about 20% of their meals, even though they're raw fed, 20% of their meal is dark leafy greens or carrots or something that's going to have a fiber source to feed the good gut bacteria. When the gut bacteria are out of balance, not only do we get IBS, but there's something called the gut-brain axis. And when you have an out of balance gut, the brain doesn't work either. So that foggy brain, lack of clarity, inability to focus. So really critically important. And another area where we don't talk about the microbiome enough is on the skin. I talked to somebody the other day and they were washing their dog every day in an antibacterial shampoo, and it was a puppy. And I said, you're ruining the microbiome. You can't do that. We don't want to use these things that are, she's like, well, it's a little fluff ball. I want him to be clean and smell good. I'm like, you got to find another way to do that. Groom him.
Yeah.
So, it's really critical that we think about that and we try to keep it in balance. So for dogs that have reflux and your veterinarian says, give them famotidine, give them omeprazole. No, fix their microbiome, fix their good guys. So there are really good probiotics on the market. Almost all of them have prebiotics in with them. Unfortunately, you'll see a lot of bags of kibble that say with probiotics. They're dead.
Yeah, they're not live.
They're not alive anymore. They're not good. So you want to, now another way to get good probiotics, if you want to do your own, you can make fermented foods. So there are companies that sell like fermented fish stock or fermented goat milk or fermented cow milk. You can make your own fermented milks. You can make kimchi, which is fermented vegetables, and feed that to your dogs. So if you don't want to spend the money to buy a probiotic, make your own.
Mm-hmm.
Ferment them.
Thank you, Doc. So how can the people connect with you, learn more? And of course, we need to have a part 2. We need to do this again because there was questions I didn't get to ask, like grain-free foods. Are they bad? Are they good? Etc. There's always going to be more questions, but how can the people who are watching connect with you and learn more?
My website is drjudymorgan.com, drjudymorgan.com. We also own naturallyhealthypets.com. So whichever one, you're going to go to the same place. We have a ton of courses. We have courses on how to get started with raw feeding, how to feed raw meaty bones, homemade dog food 101, where you can figure out how to get started, where to get started. I have 4 books. My 5th book actually just launched today, and It is called Raising Naturally Healthy Pets, available on Amazon. So there's a lot of information in there as well. And we'll be doing speaking tours around the country. So if you follow our website or sign up for our newsletter, you can find out where we will be. I know we're going to be in California, Chicago, Baltimore, Florida, New Jersey, Virginia. We're all England. We're all over the place this year. So chance to catch us live.
Congrats. Thanks you so much for your time. And I have to pick up the book, and I hope everyone else does. I did have some folks asking about where they can find recipes to start.
So we have quite a few recipes on our website. Pup loaf recipe is on the website, but there's a lot of recipes on there. And then the Yin and Yang nutrition book has about 60 recipes. So there's a lot.
Okay. Thank you, doctor.
You're quite welcome.
All right. We'll see you again, and we'll do a part 2 soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.